Thank you for watching. I'm Shakil 5858. I'm a good man. I am thankful to all news resources. Following are the news which have been reported by American, European, Canadian, African, and Asian channels. Also, news agencies, writers, AFP and AP also reported the same news. Now the headlines. Israel is ready to go into Rafah despite of international call to its halt. Demonstrations in Israel against the Israeli government relating to the hostage crisis. After 6 months and using so much power, Israel is still far away from its goal, that is, finishing Hamas. Upcoming solar eclipse creating hip-hop in North America and Canada. Ukraine vowed to continue war with Russia despite of no help from West. College women basketball championship in North America, South Carolina winner. Someone has won more than $1 billion in Oregon in lotto ticket. Russian foreign minister in China. African news are also included regarding Rwanda, Kenya. Now the news in detail.
Tonight on PBS News Weekend, as the women's college basketball tournament wraps up, why women's sports are reaching new heights in popularity and revenue. Then how one community is working to preserve its mid-century architecture and the history behind it.
These buildings act as living textbooks to help us understand the progression of time, and because they endure for so long, I see very little reason why they shouldn't endure much longer for future generations.
And the projected economic boon as millions of people travel to see Monday's total eclipse of the sun.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by
Consumer Cellular. This is Sam. How may I help you? This is Pocket Dial. Well, somebody's pocket.
Thought I'd let you know that with Consumer Cellular,
You get nationwide coverage with no contract. That's kind of our thing.
have a nice day.
Certified Financial Planner professionals are proud to support PBS News Weekend. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the News Hour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm John Yang. It was 6 months ago today that the brutal Hamas attack on southern Israel triggered the war in Gaza. Today, Israel said it's pulling some of its troops out of southern Gaza, which has been the center of military operations for the last few months. The move brings the Israeli presence in Gaza down to one of the lowest levels of the conflict. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said in the area where the troops spent the last 4 months, Hamas is no longer what he called a functioning military unit. Other Israeli officials cautioned against reading too much into the move about the future of the war. On ABC's This Week, White House National Security spokesman John Kirby echoed that view.
It is really just about rest and refit for these troops that have been on the ground for 4 months, and not necessarily, that we can tell, indicative of some coming new operation for these troops. They've been on the ground for 4 months. The word we're getting is they're tired, they need to be refit.
Fears of a wider regional conflict were stoked today when a top Iranian military advisor said no Israeli embassy is safe. That's after last week's strike on an Iranian diplomatic building in Damascus, blamed on Israel, that killed several Iranian generals. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel is prepared for anything. Russia has declared a national emergency as the Ural River has flooded, causing a dam to break near the Kazakh border. Rising waters have forced more than 4,000 people from their homes, and officials say the situation is getting worse. Russia's launched a criminal investigation into the construction of the dam. In Kigali, Rwanda, somber ceremonies marked 30 years since an estimated 800,000 people were killed by government-backed extremists. Bill Clinton, the U.S. president at the time, joined African and Western leaders to lay wreaths and light a memorial flame. Rwandan President Paul Kagame said the international community's inaction allowed the genocide of ethnic Tutsis at the hands of Hutu extremists. And there's finally a winning Powerball ticket. It was sold in Oregon and is worth $1.3 billion. That jackpot built up over a record-tying 41 straight drawings without a winner. If taken as a lump sum rather than paid out over 30 years, the haul would be $621 million. That is, of course, before taxes. Still to come on PBS News Weekend, what's behind the effort to protect a style of architecture in Phoenix, and how eclipse tourism is brightening the economies of some small towns.
This is PBS News Weekend from WETA Studios in Washington, home of the PBS News Hour, weeknights on PBS.
Interest in women's sports has never been higher than it's been this past week during the NCAA women's basketball tournament, which ends today. At least 2 of the games were the most watched women's basketball games ever. More viewers even than last year's World Series or NBA Finals. Earlier, I talked about what's behind this boom in women's sports with Claire Watkins. She's host of the podcast, The Late Sub, for the website Just Women's Sports. Claire, we've seen such a growth in the popularity and even revenue for women's sports in the last few years. What's behind this boom?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think we're seeing investment off of the field, off of the court, where people are realizing that this is an opportunity, not only on the business end, but also just we're seeing the rise of the parity in sports themselves. I think if you look, for example, at the NCAA tournament this year, we're seeing rising parity in the league or across the NCAA, and that is turning into more local and national interest. And we're also just seeing larger media properties like ESPN seeing this as a valuable part of their assets. And so we're seeing more investment in making women's sports more accessible as well.
You talk about parity. There doesn't seem to be an interest parity between the men's tournament and the women's tournament this year. It seems like there's a lot more excitement, a lot more interest in the women's tournament. Why do you think that is?
Some of it is just purely logistical, I think, in some ways. It's the norm in women's basketball for players to stay for an entire 4 years. So, for example, if you have a really exciting freshman, like, for example, Paige Beckers 4 years ago or Caitlin Clark 4 years ago, they stay at those programs for their entire college career. So you get attached to them in those jerseys. You get local fan bases get attached to these players. And so I think the iconography of women's college basketball has more opportunity to grow or surrounding players themselves than perhaps we see in the men's game with the more one-and-done structure.
Since 2022, the women's tournament has had 68 teams, just like the men's tournament. Do you think that has had any effect on the quality of play?
Absolutely. I'm a big believer that more programming raises parity throughout. I think you see this not only in college sports, but also in professional sports. So I think if you give the greater opportunities, if you treat it like that premier event that it deserves to be treated as, and you give more schools an opportunity to participate in it, that encourages those schools to then invest in their programs, recruit a little bit deeper. It encourages players to maybe not chase certain schools and maybe stay closer to home. And so those greater opportunities to play on the big stage or to go to the big dance, I do think makes a huge impact in seeing higher talent levels further to the fringes of the sport.
It also seems like the women's game has evolved over the years. You're seeing more three-point shots. You're seeing more physical play. You're seeing more on-court taunting, sort of getting more like the men's game used to be. Do you think that's a factor, too, in the rise of the popularity?
Absolutely. I mean, basketball is a personality-driven sport. It's one of the most personality-driven sports that we have in this country. And again, once you get to know these players and they get to know each other, and the women's college game is a little bit more based in traditional post play. You do see players drive to the rim. You see big blocks, maybe like a past era of what we saw in the men's game. And it drives competition. We're seeing these players be encouraged to express themselves. And this is a big deal, right? Like, as you do see more investment into the sport, these are high stakes. And you're seeing players respond to that as well.
You talk about more investment into the sport. You know, in 2021, the picture of the women's weight room at the NCAA tournament compared to the men's weight room went viral. The NCAA until then wouldn't allow the term March Madness to be used for the women's tournament. Do you think you're going to see colleges and schools put more money into women's programs now?
I would like to think so. I mean, as we know, college athletics is in sort of a state of flux every year right now. I do think NIL opportunities have changed the commercial viability of women's sports dramatically. I think a lot of that is being done outside of traditional avenues. I mean, I think we see a lot of brands investing in these players. We're seeing a reach on social media that has an impact for these players. I would like to think that will be followed by further traditional investment from athletic departments, but I think there is so much in flux just with NCAA sports in general that it's a lot of wait and see. But I do think, again, when you are seeing the output and you're seeing the exponential growth of not only popularity, but just the quality of play, I would like to think that that's encouraging to see more traditional resources, absolutely.
Talk about the exponential growth. What do you see as the future in the next few years or even beyond for women's sports?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I think what we're seeing in terms of television numbers will only go up. I think we're seeing obviously a rising tide, I think, in sports in general, and people are really excited about new properties. And I think it's underrated just how young women's sports are in terms of traditional leagues or in that, like we said, that traditional March Madness for the NCAA women's basketball tournament is so new. You're going to see allegiances get built, lifelong fandoms. You're going to see people respond to women's sports less like something they're being introduced to and more like something that they've always had in their lives. And I think that's just going to continue to grow up this in this equity space versus what's been pretty overpowered by men's sports traditionally.
Claire Watkins, host of the podcast, The Late Sub. Thank you very much.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Some see older buildings as revered artifacts that have stood the test of time. Others see them as occupying sites that could be used for new development. Allie Rogan went to one place where that tension is playing out, Phoenix, which is a rich source of one specific style of architecture.
In the Valley of the Sun, nature's gifts abound. So too do man-made treasures that help tell the story of post-war America. Phoenix is a trove of mid-century modern architecture, a style that mirrored the optimism of America after soldiers returned home from World War II. Designs focused on function, creative use of materials, and a connection to nature.
It's what we call desert architecture.
Allison King is a professor of design history and runs Modern Phoenix, an archive and community for enthusiasts of mid-century modernism.
Why is Phoenix such a hub for mid-century modern architecture? Well, this really was the land of opportunity in the post-war era.
In the 40s, more than 1 million young men trained for deployment at military bases throughout Arizona. After the war, many of those GIs returned, drawn by cheap land and a warm climate. And it was two of those out-of-town servicemen, Al Beadle and Ralph Haver, who became the architectural founding fathers of Phoenix.
They saw a lot of opportunity for growth, as well as for business. And so many of these architects were part of the pattern of growth of our city to help build the civic buildings, the schools, the banks, the infrastructure, and of course, most importantly, the housing to house these people.
When Beadle's Executive Towers condo building opened in 1963, it was the tallest in Arizona, billed as vertical living for the upwardly mobile.
It's the Frigidaire flare.
Writer Robert Pala tried not to change a thing in his unit, including the appliances.
When you buy an old building, I think you are beholden to honor it. Because if we continue to rip down our visual heritage, our architectural history, we will never have any character.
In Phoenix and around the country, you'll find mid-century modern enthusiasts who are passionate about protecting these buildings. But there's another school of thought that believes sometimes preservation impedes progress.
It can restrict the growth of that area, increase the price of housing, and make it difficult for neighborhoods and communities to adapt as the situation around them changes.
Economist Adam Millsap is a senior fellow at Stand Together Trust, a philanthropic organization funded by billionaire Charles Koch. He says he's not opposed to all historic preservation.
I think it's more about how it can be misused, but I think that's where you run into problems, and you just start preserving things for a variety of reasons that don't necessarily have to do with preserving history, but might be done for other purposes.
We're in Marlin Grove, which was designed by Ralph Haver in the mid-1950s.
Allison King says not every piece of modern architecture can or should be saved, but she and other preservationists believe Arizona's laws make it harder to protect historic buildings. That includes a 2006 measure that strengthened the rights of property owners when faced with government attempts to take private property for public use, what's known as eminent domain.
It's not always easy to convince property owners that what they have is worth putting on some sort of register to afford it protection.
King and her peers have had some high-profile victories. In 2012, they blocked a developer from tearing down a home built by renowned architect Frank Lloyd Wright for his son, demonstrating in front of the house and convincing the city to delay demolition.
Right now at 6, trying to preserve Arizona history. This mid-century modern home could be demolished.
King's latest challenge, saving White Gates, an iconic Beetle home never designated as historic. Its new owner intends to build an entirely new house, but there's a hold on demolition until mid-April. King and her community are trying to convince the owner to sell.
These buildings act as living textbooks to help us understand the progression of time, and because they endure for so long, I see very little reason why they shouldn't endure much longer for future generations.
That's what architect Tyler Sternberg and his wife Vanessa had in mind for their Ralph Haver designed home. Haver's trademark was mass-produced but customizable dwellings, perfect for the post-war baby boom.
We kind of had a couple kids right when we bought this house, and we knew we needed to grow a little bit more.
In the 1950s, Haverhoods were marketed as middle-class meccas.
What's so cool about Haver homes is you can tinker with them. They were designed that way. Because they were so modest in the beginning, the idea was to let families grow into them.
But not all families were welcome. Some homes were advertised as highly restricted, code for whites only. The deeds to many historic Phoenix homes still have those restrictions, which some homeowners have tried to expunge, but experts like Rashad Shabazz believe that history should remain exposed.
Retaining these restrictive covenants in the deeds are a reminder of Arizona's relatively recent history around racism that is really imbued into the housing market.
Shabazz is a professor of geography and African American studies at Arizona State University. The deed to his home has a restrictive covenant.
50 or so years ago, I couldn't have moved here with my family, and other black and brown people couldn't have moved into this neighborhood. It really helps us to see how deeply institutionalized it is, but it's also a reminder of how close we are to it.
I think that it's important that we as citizens feel tied to the roots of our city and understand the story of how our city developed. And as well, many of these works of architecture are actually works of art.
It's pretty glamorous to walk down these stairs.
There's no mistaking the artistry inside the office of Upward Projects, a restaurant group located in the Phoenix Financial Center, designed in the mid-60s for a booming banking industry.
When we were looking for office space, we really wanted something architecturally relevant to go with our adaptive reuse style of the way we do business.
Like Phoenix's mythical namesake, the process of adaptive reuse creates new structures from the remains of the old. In 2001, co-founders Craig and Krista Marco started that process inside an old post office.
We fell in love with the architecture, the age of the building, the neighborhood that surrounded it, and giving it a second life.
The post office reopened as Postino, a wine bar that's since grown to 25 locations across 6 states. At 40 years old, Postino's original site was hardly historic.
I think as time has gone on, people have realized they are special, they need to be preserved, they need to be celebrated and recognized.
And like the wines on the menu at Postino, preservationists say these buildings will only get better with time.
Architecture is shelter, essentially, and the way that we shelter each other and take care of each other is a symbol of the story of who we are as humans.
For PBS News Weekend, I'm Allie Rogan in Phoenix.
Tomorrow, the moon will slip between the Earth and the Sun, casting a shadow that will cut across North America from Mazatlan on Mexico's Pacific coast to Newfoundland on Canada's Atlantic coast. Communities along that path hope it will be a bright spot for hotels, restaurants, and gas stations as people flock to them to experience this rare event. By some estimates, eclipse tourism could generate as much as $1.5 billion. One place that's drawing attention is Oklahoma, and that's where communities reporter Adam Kemp is based. Adam, where in Oklahoma will a total eclipse be seen?
Totality will cross a pretty narrow path across the southeastern corner of Oklahoma, covering the area in darkness for about 4.5 minutes. Most people might think of Oklahoma as open plains and farmland, but this area of the state's pretty different. It's very lush forests, lakes, rivers, streams, and a lot of hiking trails, which is kind of making it an ideal spot for people looking to experience the eclipse in some nature.
What effect is that having on that corner of the state?
Yeah, experts are expecting a financial boon for the area, basically. The Oklahoma Department of Tourism has already come out to say they expect a $7 million impact for each day of the weekend and the eclipse day itself. Really kind of benefiting that area. I talked to the mayor of Hochatown, Oklahoma, which is a popular weekend getaway spot. They have more than 2,400 rental properties in the area, and right now more than 95% of those are booked out. Those rooms and rental rates are going upwards of $400 to $500 a night, and I even talked to some local businesses who are selling their parking spots off for people just to sit during the day of. They're going for $100 for the day, so a financial boon for these areas for sure.
And I'd also imagine a lot more people than normal are going to be in that corner of Oklahoma. What are officials doing to prepare for the crowds?
Experts say 70,000 people are expected to visit the area, upwards of that, and that's more than double what this area would see on a really busy holiday weekend. Because of that, the state and city officials officials have really been planning for this for months now. The Oklahoma National Guard has been called out to be on guard during that time. They will be stationed to handle both crowd control and traffic, which is expected to be really horrible as this area is mainly just 2-lane highways. The Oklahoma Highway Patrol will also send 100 officers down to the area to be on standby. Beyond that, local businesses are actually asking employees to spend the night before, just in case they can't get to work the day of the eclipse due to this bad traffic. And city officials are saying, pack your patience. Make sure that you have a full tank of gas, that you are bringing plenty of perishable food and water with you, just in case you're in your car for an extended period of time.
Over the years, there's been a lot of folklore and legends connected and relating to eclipses. I know there are a sizable Native American population in Oklahoma. Is there any folklore among them?
The Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma actually is a big swath of this area of totality. And ahead of the eclipse, they've been telling a story that they say dates back to their ancestors on the Trail of Tears. It's about Fani Lusa. It's a giant black squirrel that attempts to eat the sun, but is scared away by the Choctaw people who are get out there and bang pots and pans as well as firing off guns. The Choctaw Nation's actually been telling the story ahead of the eclipse, and I talked to Don Standridge of the Choctaw Nation just about what it means to have people come visit and to be able to share their culture with people from across the U.S.
It's exciting for us to be able to have all these individuals coming from everywhere to learn about Choctaw history in the midst of this eclipse. Yes, we're going to tell about the squirrel and what our beliefs were around that, but it's also telling us, how our people got here from Mississippi, Alabama, what they had to endure. So being able to impart that history to them as well, that's, we are excited about it. We're looking forward to it.
And on the day of eclipse, they actually plan on telling that story and encouraging people to bring their own pots and pans.
So Adam, I know this is not your first total eclipse. I believe it's at least your second, but what are you going to be doing tomorrow?
I'm actually going to head down to the Choctaw Nation. I want to experience that myself. I'm going to be at one of the historic sites, listening to the story of Fani Lusa and really experience that. The weather right now is projected to be really nice and not a lot of cloud cover in the area, so I might have to bring my pots and pans with me.
Okay, have fun. Adam Kemp in Oklahoma. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Finally tonight, an annual gathering of global crucive verbalists, people who love to solve crossword puzzles. Nearly 1,000 of them gathered in Connecticut this weekend for the 46th annual crossword puzzle tournament. Will Shortz has been the New York Times crossword editor for more than 30 years. He started the event in 1978. This year's competition drew the biggest crowd yet. Over 2 days, solvers raced to complete 8 specially created puzzles. The fastest and most accurate among them took home a grand prize of $7,500 and bragging rights to last a lifetime. This year's champion solver, 23-year-old Paolo Pasco, a first-time winner. He completed the final puzzle in just 5 minutes and 42 seconds without a single mistake. An update for you. South Carolina has beaten Iowa 87-75 to win the Women's College Basketball National Championship. It's their third title and caps an undefeated season. Now online, while millions are preparing for tomorrow's total solar eclipse, scientists are using the celestial event to learn more about the sun. All that and more is on our website, pbs.org/newshour. And that is PBS News Weekend for this Sunday. On Monday, millions of people prepare for the total eclipse of the sun, the likes of which we won't see for another 20 years. I'm John Yang. For all of my colleagues, thanks for joining us. Have a good week.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by Certified Financial Planner Professionals are proud to support PBS News Weekend. CFP professionals are
Israel pulls more troops from Khan Yunis in southern Gaza to prepare for future missions, including in Rafah, as the World Health Organization demands an end to what it calls the systematic dismantling of Gaza's health system. Rwanda's President Paul Kagame leads a first day of commemorations in Kigali to mark 30 years since the 1994 genocide, in which 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus were massacred. And President Volodymyr Zelensky sounds another stark warning, saying Ukraine will lose the war against Russia unless the US approves a military aid package that's still held up in Congress. Good evening to wherever you're watching. Thanks for joining us here on France 24. First up, the Israeli army has pulled more soldiers from southern Gaza, leaving just one brigade in the area. The defense ministry said the partial pullout from the city of Khan Yunis was to prepare for future missions, including in Rafah. Israel has plans for a ground offensive in Gaza's southernmost city, where more than 1 million displaced Palestinians have taken shelter. It says Hamas militants are operating a command center there. The army also declared another phase of preparation for war on its northern border with Lebanon. In the past hours, 3 people have been reportedly killed in an Israeli strike in southern Lebanon. An elite forces commander of the Iran-backed Hezbollah movement was among those killed in Al-Sultaniya village, according to Reuters. Well, it's not the first drawdown of forces in Gaza. Earlier in the war, Israel pulled troops from the devastated north, while continuing airstrikes and raids in several areas where it says Hamas has regrouped. That includes Gaza's largest hospital, Al-Shifa. The United Nations, which visited the site on Saturday, said it was now an empty shell and literally a graveyard. The World Health Organization has demanded an end to what it called the systematic dismantling of Gaza's health system. Inka Oitari has more.
This mother doesn't know who to turn to for help. Her son will never walk again after being wounded in a strike. At the hospital where he's receiving treatment, worsening conditions are compounding his misery.
There's no more medicine in this hospital. No more of the urine bags my son needs. Not even any painkillers. My son has been wearing the same diaper for 3 days.
Gaza's health system is on its knees. This is the only hospital still functioning in the north of the enclave and is overwhelmed with sick and wounded patients. Film our miserable lives. There's no bed available, no medicine, nothing. Doctors here say on average 15 children suffering from malnutrition are admitted every day. The condition has already claimed the lives of 23 children in the north, according to the health ministry.
Malnutrition causes serious complications. It's killed many children and elderly people.
In this area to the north of Gaza City, almost every pharmacy is in ruins. This man has diabetes and is struggling to get a hold of medicine. In Gaza, many chronic illnesses such as heart failure are no longer treated due to a lack of infrastructure and drugs.
Even when you manage to find medicine, it's often out of date.
Al-Shifa Hospital is no longer an option for those desperate for help. Gaza's largest healthcare facility is now just rubble following Israel's operation there. Among the ruins, this man has just found the body of his mother. She had been receiving treatment here.
She had told me that nobody was taking care of her. She would say, I don't have water, I'm sleeping on the floor. Her last words were, where are you, my son?
Further away, this mother is mourning the deaths of her 2 sons. Whether they were militants or not won't change her pain.
Israelis have held protests in Jerusalem, with thousands gathering in front of Parliament to demand the return of hostages from Gaza. It follows massive anti-government demonstrations across Israel on Saturday. Of the 250 Israelis and foreigners kidnapped during the 7th of October attacks, the Israeli army says 129 are still in Gaza. 34 of them are presumed dead. Next, Rwanda's President Paul Kagame has led commemorations to mark 30 years since the 1994 genocide. Between the 7th of April and the 4th of July that year, 800,000 people were killed, mostly Tutsis and also moderate Hutus. Isaac Hamadov takes us through this first day of commemorations in Kigali.
An eternal flame in memory of the 800,000 victims of the 1994 genocide, lit by President Paul Kagame and his wife at the Genocide Memorial in Kigali, where over 250,000 victims are believed to be buried. At their side stand 32 visiting heads of state, including representatives of neighboring countries and allies. At the commemoration ceremony, the Rwandan president addressed the survivors of the massacre.
We are in your debt. We asked you to do the impossible by carrying the burden of reconciliation on your shoulders. And you continue to do so, continue to do the impossible for our nation every single day, and we thank you.
The April 7th ceremony marks the day Hutu extremists launched an 100-day massacre on the Tutsis and moderate Hutus. Across Rwanda, there are over 200 genocide memorials, and new mass graves continue to be discovered. Today, unless linked to the commemorations, music is not allowed in public places, nor on the radio. Sports events and films are also banned. The next 100 days will be dedicated to remembering the events of 1994.
Here in the French capital, the Eiffel Tower was lit up to mark the 30th anniversary of the Rwanda genocide, which has long been a source of tension between the two countries. President Emmanuel Macron has acknowledged France's role in failing to heed warnings of the looming massacres. Last week, he said his country and Western allies could have stopped the genocide, but lacked the will to do so. Russian forces continue to make gains in Ukraine, and as it happens, President Volodymyr Zelensky has sounded another stark warning. Kyiv will lose the war again unless the US approves a new military aid package that's still held up in Congress. This comes as one woman was killed in Kupiansk on Sunday, with 5 more injured in the city of Kharkiv from fresh Russian strikes. Nick Rushworth has this latest.
I wanted to ask you to continue your work.
Without aid from the US Congress, the war will be lost. That was Volodymyr Zelensky's message as he spoke during a video meeting of a fundraising platform for Ukraine.
We
must tell Congress that if Congress does not help Ukraine, Ukraine will lose the war. And we need to find a public format for this. If Ukraine loses the war, other states will be attacked. And that's a fact.
It's a fact.
The Ukrainian president is issuing stark warnings about the deteriorating situation faced by Ukraine's air defenses. He says he still believes Kyiv can get a positive vote in Congress, where Republicans have been blocking tens of billions of dollars in military assistance for months.
It will be new and extra money.
NATO has reiterated its strong support. The NATO Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, says he is confident a long-term funding deal for Kyiv would be agreed by July.
Long-term. The paradox is that the clearer we convey to President Putin that he cannot wait us out, the more likely it is that his war can end in a way which is just and lasting. Because now President Putin believes that he can win on the battlefield. We need to convey to him that he will not win on the battlefield.
Amid delays in supplies of vital Western aid, the Ukrainian army is struggling. The key battle is taking place around eastern Ukraine's frontline city of Chasiv Yar, an important rail and logistics hub for the Ukrainian army. Also on Sunday, among reports of fighting in various locations, Russian strikes wounded several people in Kharkiv, which is Ukraine's second largest city. 30 kilometers from the Russian border, it has been badly affected by Russia's renewed missile and drone attacks since late March.
Huge floods in the Russian city of Orsk have forced over 4,000 people to evacuate. Moscow announced a federal emergency as it warned of dangerous water levels in Siberia. Torrential rain caused a dam to burst on Friday in the southern Urals region near Kazakhstan. More rainfall is forecast, with its peak expected on Tuesday. Sophie Lamotte has the story.
Rescue operations are underway since a dam burst on Friday in Russia's Orenburg region near the Kazakh border. Within a few hours, water rose by 4 meters in certain areas. The ground floor was flooded in the 9-story apartment building there. The water went onto the ground floor.
I want to sob, not just cry. I feel terrible.
No casualties have been reported, but a federal emergency has been declared, and over 4,500 people, including hundreds of children, have been evacuated so far.
People are being evacuated using watercrafts, inflatable boats, and transporters that can accommodate up to 50 people. This evacuation is being carried out gradually, street by street, and people are also being notified through loudspeakers.
Authorities say the dam was built to resist the river's usual level of 5.5 meters. Due to torrential rains and melting ice, water levels doubled, which could have caused the dam to partially collapse. Russian authorities opened a criminal investigation into the cause of the dam burst, and until this breach is fixed, there's no end in sight.
The flood situation remains critical. The water is coming, and in the coming days, its level will only rise. The power outages will continue, and if that happens, it means you must evacuate immediately.
Neighboring Kazakhstan has also been affected by the floods, with President Tokayev saying they were one of the country's worst natural disasters in the last 80 years.
More than 90 people have died off the northern coast of Mozambique after a makeshift ferry capsized. Many children were among the victims, according to officials. The overcrowded fishing boat was carrying around 130 people, with most reportedly trying to escape the mainland due to panic caused by disinformation about a cholera outbreak. And finally, across North and Central America, anticipation is building ahead of a total solar eclipse on Monday. From Mexico through the US and eastern Canada, millions of skygazers are planning parties to watch the daylight sky go dark, none more so than in Texas, which hasn't seen a solar eclipse in 150 years. And here's the problem. The forecast is cloudy again.
4 minutes and 20 seconds. That's how long the moon is expected to cover the sun during the total solar eclipse this Monday in Waxahachie, Texas. This small town south of Dallas is right in the middle of the path of total darkness, which stretches from Mexico and Texas through Maine and parts of Canada. And the town's population has doubled for the event.
My understanding is there's going to be over 100,000 that are going to be right in town here.
I'm very excited. I think we're all really excited just to be in the line of totality. It's a very slim line, so we're really lucky to be right in the middle of it, basically.
This is the region's first total solar eclipse since 1878. Back then, the weather forecast detailed cloudy skies all morning. But just before the moon lined up between the sun and the earth that afternoon, the sky cleared up. Residents across Texas hope to be so lucky once again.
Yeah, we've heard it's supposed to be cloudy. Unclear exactly how many clouds there will be, or if there'll be high clouds or low clouds. I've heard the high clouds are not as bad as low clouds. So I would say I'm definitely nervous.
All the way in Canada, people are getting ready, buying solar eclipse glasses, and visiting the Science Centre to understand this rare phenomenon.
Here at the Ontario Science Centre, all weekend long, we are running the Astronomy Hub Eclipse Edition. So we're getting our visitors ready and excited for the upcoming April 8th eclipse. We're sharing safety tips for viewing the eclipse, ways to view it directly and indirectly, as well as some really cool hands-on activities.
It will look like that. It'll look very orange in color, and then little by little, it's like someone taking a bite out of the sun.
The next total solar eclipse visible in this part of the world is not expected to happen for another 20 years.
And that is about it from us for the moment. So thanks for staying with us here on France 24 from all of us on the Night Watch team. See you next time.
I'm Natalie Savrikas, France 24's Athens correspondent. I'll be bringing you the latest from Greece and Cyprus live here on news and other TV programs. So join me here on France 24. France 24's Athens correspondent. I'll be bringing you the latest from Greece and Cyprus live here on news and other TV programs. So join me here on France 24.
Natalie Savrikas, one of the 200 France 24 correspondents around the world.
Thanks for staying with us. Time now for Across Africa, our weekly look at stories from across the continent. I'm Georgia Calvin-Smith, and this week, Uganda's Constitutional Court threw out a challenge to the homophobic law adopted last May that triggered international criticism, despite attracting widespread domestic support. Also, Congolese wordsmiths are using the French spoken word as a tool of advocacy and self-expression. The Tetris Collective, a trio with a deep love of Congolese and French literature, use slam poetry to explore their passion for wordplay. And although gender does not officially affect land rights in Senegal, in practice, many rural women farmers struggle to secure access in traditional communities, sidelining them from ownership. But first, 1 year after its anti-gay law came into effect on Wednesday, Uganda's Constitutional Court rejected a bid to overturn it. The legislation has been widely criticised by Western powers and human rights advocates, but is domestically popular. Many members of Uganda's LGBT+ community have fled the country since last May amidst a rise in homophobic attacks. Clément Roma tells us more.
Members of the LGBT+ community and rights defenders expressed profound disappointment this Wednesday following a decision by Ugandan top judges to uphold most provisions of the Anti-Homosexuality Act.
Because the simple question before the court was whether the equal protection of law under our constitution extends to every single Ugandan, regardless of whether we like them or we don't like them. And I think in that regard, the court, I think, let us down and failed to protect a section of our community.
This law imposes severe penalties for the LGBTQI+, with a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison if their sexual orientation is discovered. It also mandates the death penalty for cases categorized as aggravated homosexuality. According to the Ugandan NGO Company for Equality, this law violates the principles of dignity, equality, privacy, and freedom of speech. This group has also already denounced around 50 arrests by authorities, forced medical examinations, and hundreds of assaults across the country over the past year. Despite these abuses, the law remains highly popular in Uganda, although much less so among donors such as the World Bank or the US, which have restricted their development aid. The court has removed articles from the law related to the LGBTQ+ health access in the hope of resuming Western-backed funding programs.
Well, 30 years on, and Rwanda is still piecing together its understanding of the circumstances that led to the 1994 genocide in which over 800,000 Tutsis and their supporters were killed. The granular details of who did what and who was lost are also still being unpicked. But with time dimming memories and eroding evidence, survivors' organisations are racing to digitise surviving important documents. Our team tells us more.
These survivors of the genocide against the Tutsis in Rwanda are sifting through thousands of files. Their organization is still looking for information about what led up to the massacres 30 years ago.
There may be new testimonies, and there may also be information about the preparation of the genocide. We want to make these documents accessible, so that researchers who need them will have access to them, just like other people who want to know what happened during the genocide, how it was prepared, how it was executed.
After initial sorting, documents are digitally scanned and stored on dedicated computer servers. The group began updating storage of the archives in early 2022.
All these papers we sort here will be digitized. Without numbering and digitizing them, the archive process isn't complete.
Today, the preservation of documents related to the genocide is a national priority. Another NGO, Aegis Trust, focuses its efforts to safeguard history on collecting recorded accounts of what happened. This woman lost all of her children during the 1994 mass killings.
I was asked to testify and accepted because I'm sure that my story will help people heal from their traumas. It will help those who listen to me.
This center offers support to women who lost their husbands in the genocide. Many have shared the stories. The accounts are later translated into English and posted online. Every year, the time left to collect these perspectives grows smaller.
The elderly people are aging. They're starting to forget. So we mustn't miss this. We must use every possible means to record these testimonies while there's still time.
As part of its commemorative efforts, Rwanda will introduce digital tours of the 170 memorial sites that are also the final resting places of many of the victims of the genocide.
Well, Sudanese journalists have slammed the Information Ministry's decision to suspend the works of 3 foreign broadcasters. They've been accused of a lack of professionalism and failure to renew their licenses. But as the war that has riven the country approaches its first anniversary, the crackdown appears amidst an overall erosion of press and other freedoms in the country. Our regional correspondent tells us more.
Sudanese journalists working for these 3 news channels won't be allowed to work for them in Sudan anymore. Al-Haddad published a statement on social networks saying that their journalists discovered the news watching a state-owned Sudanese TV, but that they were not notified of this decision. Later, the Ministry of Information published a statement saying that these journalists were lacking transparency and professionalism, but it's yet to publish any proof of these allegations. Quickly after, the Sudanese Journalist Syndicate published a statement on X, formerly known as Twitter, saying that silencing the voice of the professional media will open the door of the to the spread of rumor and hate speech, and it's getting more and more difficult for professional journalists to work every day in Sudan. Foreigners are not allowed in the country anymore. That's why I'm reporting from Nairobi, and there are just a few locals still working for international news channels. They are threatened every day. Many of them have been killed since the beginning of the war on the 15th of April 2023. Some were killed by bombardments, but many have been shot either by the military or the rapid support forces. If the government, meaning the Sudanese military, decide to prevent them from working in Sudan, it means that the country will soon be in a total blackout.
Bastien Renouy there for us. Now, although legally men and women should have equal land rights in Senegal, in practice that's often not what happens. The inequality has made it particularly difficult for women farmers from communities still operating according to customs that sideline them from ownership. Reese Fortuné has more.
Adding a bit of water, preparing compost is part of his training session in the town of Nyasia in the Casamance region. These female farmers, who traditionally have no access to education, are learning about their rights, how to finance their projects, and possibly influence future legislation.
We have 3 objectives. The first is to promote the knowledge and know-how of the farmers who have long preserved food sovereignty in Africa. The second is to influence political decision-makers to improve agricultural governance. And the third objective is to promote products derived from agroecological practices or family farming.
Maria Masonko is the president of a 115,000-strong rural women's rights movement in West Africa called We Are the Solution. As is the case across Senegal and West Africa generally, women are not entitled to land ownership, as it is expected when they marry, they will leave a community.
We can't follow every woman in her family's field, but we can bring them together here to build their capacity through practical demonstration sessions that will help them to better understand and improve their level of development.
Today, Maria Masonko is trying to set up 7 new training centers across southern Senegal. In 1 week, she and her team trained over 100 women from Senegal, Guinea-Bissau and Gambia in agroforestry and micro-gardening.
Well, Congolese wordsmiths are using the French spoken word as a tool of advocacy and self-expression. The Tetris Collective, a trio with a deep love of Congolese and French literature, use slam poetry to explore their passion for wordplay. Our team reports.
In the streets of Congo's capital, Kinshasa, Lingala, one of the country's 4 national languages, is spoken everywhere.
I'm Congolese. I speak Lingala. What comes out of my mouth can only be Lingala.
French is still seen as the language of bureaucracy and state institutions, but some creatives are reclaiming the language for expression of less procedural aspects of their lives and are exploring its poetic lyricism. Wordsmiths have come together in the neighborhood of Limete for a slam poetry workshop.
Comme lors du baptême du Christ, celui-ci est mon poète bien-aimé en qui j'ai mis toute l'addiction, l'incarnation de Orphée ou de Césaire, et je lui dis Elia, Elia, les Loslam et Botami, Elia, Elia, les Loslam et Botami.
It's run by a collective called Tetra, who play with the spoken spoken word, creatively reshaping the vocabulary, rhythm, and delivery of French.
I sing in French, but maybe that doesn't encourage me to speak French. But when I listen to slam in French, it's oral poetry. So when someone speaks in French, I have this need to understand what the person's saying, and the little French that I once knew may come back.
The performances are often political or draw on social realities, tackling concerns about governance or conflict in the country's east. The trio also draw on their love of literature, sprinkling their lyrics with references to their favourite local authors, like Zamenga, Batukezanga, or French writers, like Jean de La Fontaine.
It's really interesting to take those references and put them in the texts and develop them. We're not saying they're always right, but we can challenge them and find something even more interesting.
The performance extends to their clothes. Tetra often dresses clerics as a metaphorical demonstration of their devotion to the world of letters by delivering their powerful verses before those congregated. Audiences, transported by Tetra's eloquence, have increasingly become dedicated devotees.
Je vous salue Sam, petit frère de la poésie. Tetra est avec vous, vous êtes béni entre tous les arts. Et le fruit de vos entrailles semble jamais Massia Fernando Kusenjo Bedbosa. Thanks, poésie, merde des émotions.
Well, that's it for Across Africa for now. Thanks for joining us, though. Do so again if you can. Till then, take care. UNRWA, the UN agency that manages the daily lives of nearly 6 million Palestinians, is at the heart of a global storm.
This is Asia Now.
Hello and good morning. It's 11 a.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong, 8:30 in New Delhi, 10 o'clock in Jakarta. I'm Yasmin Yonkers. At this hour, Israel withdraws most troops from southern Gaza. The defense minister says the forces will be preparing for next missions, including in Rafah. Meantime, negotiators gather in Cairo for truce talks. Russia's top diplomat touches down in China for an official visit to discuss the war in Ukraine and strengthen bilateral ties. The visit comes just after the US Treasury Secretary warned Beijing of significant consequences if its companies support Russia's war in Ukraine. Plus, Transportation Policy Agency survey estimates that over 1.4 million travelers want to use the bush over this year's Eid al-Fitr holiday period. And a speedier homecoming for Indonesians this Eid thanks to this high-speed wonder. Well, Israel is getting ready for its invasion of Rafah, defying global calls against it. It's pulled almost all of its ground forces out of the southern part of the enclave, saying that the troops will now prepare for future operations, including in Rafah. And the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel is one step from victory, while his military chiefs serve warning to Hamas.
החמאס הפסיק לתפקד כארגון צבאי ברחבי רצועת עזה. הכוחות יוצאים החוצה ונערכים למשימות ההמשך שלהם.
המלחמה בעזה נמשכת, ואנחנו רחוקים מלהפסיק. בכירי החמאס עדיין מסתתרים. אנחנו נגיע אליהם במוקדם או במאוחר.
The imminent attack on Rafah comes as the war enters its 7th month, with widespread death and devastation in Gaza. The Hamas-run health ministry says more than 33,000 people have been killed, with nearly all Israeli troops pulled out of Khan Yunis. Residents who earlier fled to Rafah have returned, but found heaps of concrete where their homes once stood.
جينا نفقد البيت، ما لقيناش بيوت اصلا، ركام ودبش، ما تقدرش تتحرك اصلا انت. الحيوانات ما تقدرش تعيش، يعني كيف الانسان بده يرجع يعيش؟ دمار مش طبيعي.
Well, the Biden administration has been urging Israel not to invade Rafah without a proper plan to relocate Gazans. But with the attack appearing imminent, Jaguti Dave tells us if more action than words can be expected from President Biden.
Joe Biden has been talking the talk in recent weeks and months. He had a call with Benjamin Netanyahu where he issued warnings to improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza. And it's unclear, though, what actually this means materially. The Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, kind of echoed the words of President Biden, saying that if the Israeli policy didn't see specific concrete steps in the changes that Joe Biden was calling for, then US policy towards Israel could change. But the National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby declined to tell reporters what that change could entail, saying he didn't really want to preempt any changes that could or could not happen. So it's, it seems that this is a threat that the Biden administration is putting on the table there, but it's unclear whether that's a threat that they will follow through with.
Well, thousands of Israelis have once again rallied to demand their government do more to get hostages home. Hamas took more than 250 people hostage when they launched an attack inside Israel on the 7th of October last year. A brief truce saw the release of about half of them. Protesters demonstrated outside Parliament calling for a hostage deal. Relatives of the captives plastered their mouths with the number 184, marking the number of days their loved ones have been held hostage.
The government has to do everything in their power to bring them back home now.
But the Prime Minister insists there can be no deal if all hostages are not released. Mr. Netanyahu says Israel is not preventing a deal, accusing Hamas of blocking efforts.
ישראל מוכנה לעסקה, ישראל לא מוכנה לכניעה. במקום שהלחץ הבינלאומי יופנה לישראל, דבר שרק גורם לחמאס להקשיח את עמדותיו, הלחץ של הקהילה הבינלאומית צריך להיות מופנה נגד חמאס. זה יקדם את שחרור החטופים.
And some promising signs are emerging from ceasefire talks in Cairo, which both Israel and Hamas took part in separately. Egypt's Al Kahira News reports significant progress, with all parties agreeing on the basic points. And Laura Blumenfeld, who's senior fellow at the Philip Merrill Center for Strategic Studies, tells us what are the pressing issues facing negotiators in Cairo.
there's certainly a message, a strong message from President Biden saying, make that deal if you can. They're caught on some of the same issues where there's been a stalemate for several months, right? It's about the exchange rate, so to speak, how many hostages for how many Palestinian prisoners, how sort of serious crimes would the Palestinians to be released have blood on their hands or not. These are all very sensitive issues. And I think Israeli domestic politics are going to play an important role. You're seeing larger and more vocal demonstrations in the streets. The Israeli people want to bring the hostages home. The U.S. administration wants to take that hostage piece out of the war because that's really what's giving a lot of heat to the battle. Once you take the hostages out, Israel also loses a lot of their justification for going into Rafah and continuing the fight. And the hope is that we can bring about a quiet resolution, a peaceful resolution, if we get that deal.
The international nuclear watchdog has confirmed the Moscow-controlled Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant has been attacked. The IAEA said there were at least 3 direct hits on the plant and urged restraint on both sides. And the agency said at least 1 casualty was reported, but nuclear safety wasn't compromised. The Kremlin has accused Ukraine of using drones to target the nuclear plant, but a Ukrainian intelligence official was quoted as saying that Kyiv had nothing to do with it and suggested it was the work of Russians themselves. The IAEA, which has experts at the site, reported that there was no radioactive release as a result of the attack and that the damage wasn't severe. And amid heightened tensions, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned of dwindling air defense missiles.
Є системи ППО у світі, які можуть допомогти. Потрібна лише політична воля, щоб ці системи були передані Україні. Я дякую тим країнам, які вже допомогли, і бути активними у виконанні цього завдання – це персональна відповідальність наших дипломатів, які працюють за напрямками та країнами, де є необхідні системи. Зараз патріотам місце саме в Україні, щоб згодом не довелося їх застосовувати щонайменше по всьому східному флангу НАТО.
Meantime, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has landed in China. He is on an official visit to discuss the war in Ukraine and strengthen bilateral cooperation between the two allies. And he'll be speaking with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi during his 2-day visit. The meeting is expected to lay the groundwork for a possible visit by Russian President Vladimir Putin. If it happens, that visit would be his first overseas trip since the leader secured his latest 6 terms in office. And the US has warned allies that China has provided geospatial intelligence to Moscow in its war against Ukraine. Tens of thousands of people have been evacuated in Russia and Kazakhstan due to worse than usual seasonal floods. The Kremlin declared an emergency over rising flood waters after the Ural River burst through a dam near Orsk in the southern Orenburg region. The Ural River is Europe's 3rd longest and flows from the Ural Mountains to the Caspian Sea. State news agency TASS said that 6 adults and 3 children have been hospitalized. Russian authorities say more than 4,500 people have been evacuated, more than 6,500 homes flooded, and water levels are expected to continue rising. The Kremlin's warned of what it called anomalies of nature and ordered preparations for expected floods in Siberia. It's also launched a criminal investigation into suspected construction violations that may have caused a dam to break. Regional authorities said they expect the floodwaters to peak and stabilize within the next few days, and they've called on residents not to resist evacuations.
В Курганской области складывается крайне неблагоприятная паводковая обстановка. В зону возможного затопления попадают 6 муниципальных округов, в том числе областной центр, 62 населенных пункта с населением свыше 18 тысяч человек. В регионе действует режим повышенной готовности.
Meantime, Kazakhstan leaders said this is the worst natural disaster to hit the country in 80 years. The worse than usual seasonal floods have been caused by melting snow. Local hydraulic stations have shown an increase in water levels not seen in 100 years. And flood alerts are in place in parts of southern China after heavy downpours over the weekend. Severe rains have caused some rivers to burst their banks. The Bay, which is a tributary of the Pearl River, recorded its first #1 flood of the year, and this marked the earliest numbered flood in a major river since data collection began in 1998. Heavy to severe rains have been forecast until 2 p.m. today for parts of Jiangxi, Fujian, and Guangdong province. More than 800 people have been evacuated so far. Central Guangdong will see the heaviest rainfalls, accompanied by thunderstorms, strong winds, and even hail in some areas. And on Sunday, the water level at the local measuring station that lies along the banks of the bay had risen more than 4 meters above the warning level. Beijing has launched a level 4 emergency response and sent a working group to the province for inspection. China has a 4-tier flood control emergency response system, with level 1 being the most severe. And Taiwan rescuers have narrowed down the search perimeter for 2 missing Singaporeans following the release of more CCTV footage. The couple were seen alighting from a bus at the Shakadang Trail in Hualien's Taroko National Park. Landslides caused by Wednesday's earthquake have blocked tunnels and cut off road access. Nicholas Ng has more.
It's been 5 days since the Singaporean couple, identified as 47-year-old Sim Hui Kok and Neo Siu Chu, were last seen. On Saturday, Taiwan Foreign Affairs Police released footage of them at a bus terminal in Hualien. They were preparing to board a bus heading to the Taroko National Park at 6:30 a.m. The latest footage from onboard the bus showed the couple alighting at 7:20 a.m., about 40 minutes before the earthquake struck. In what appears to be crucial information, they could be seen walking in a certain direction, towards Shakadang Trail. Taroko National Park is near the epicenter of the 7.2 magnitude quake which hit on Wednesday morning. The search commander says that this new information has helped them narrow down the search area. The team is now looking at the perimeter of that trail. Drone units from Turkey are assisting with operations, which also comprises different ground teams. Rescuers say search and rescue efforts are, quote, going full steam ahead. The Singapore duo are part of at least 10 people that are still missing. At least 12 have been killed and over 1,100 have been injured.
And your Asia Business Update is next, including U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen wrapping up her China visit after raising concerns over the country's excess industrial capacity with Chinese Premier Li Qiang. Plus, another Chinese developer, Shimao Group, faces a liquidation lawsuit over failure to pay its debt.
Flashpoints in Asia that could have far-reaching consequences.
ASEAN is increasingly sitting on edge regarding what's happening in the South China Sea.
Any conflict over the Taiwan Straits is inevitably going to draw in countries around the region.
A delicate balance between peace and aggression. Wednesday on CNA.
This April, sow the seeds of hope and cultivate dreams of a brighter, greener future. Cozy up in the city's favourite nook. 3 families relive the glory days of Singapore's Book Corner and tell us what it takes to keep the story going. An unfinished portrait, Brass Bazaar Complex. Are old crops making a comeback as farmers struggle to find solutions to combat climate change? A possible solution presents itself in Forgotten Palace. Join us in a little treasure hunt and find out why major players are scrummaging the earth to get their hands on these rare metals in Power Scramble. This April on CNA.
It's great to be connected on a plane, but not all the time.
We always believe that a house is actually an urban repose. It must be a place like a sanctuary.
Every time I went to different parts of the world, I would always go to the museums, and that was the beginning of my passion for art.
The idea is to keep up a craft while the rest of the world are moving ahead.
L'équipe ou moi-même de mettre vraiment toute notre âme à réaliser le rêve de quelqu'un.
그 사람들은 그때는 나만 알고 찾아가는 곳이라고 했죠. 바나 아니면 뭐 소품샵 같은 데도 나만 가는 뭐 비밀 히든 플레이스.
They're just mesmerized by the natural beauty.
And let's start business with China's Commerce Minister Wang Wentao saying that the country's electric vehicle companies do not rely on subsidies to gain a competitive advantage. In a roundtable discussion in Paris, Mr. Wang added that accusations of overcapacity by the US and other countries are groundless. And he said that Beijing will actively support enterprises in safeguarding what he called their legitimate rights and interests. The comments come after the US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen addressed issues about China's excess industrial capacity with Premier Li Qiang during her visit to Beijing. She's previously criticized China for flooding the global market with cheap products to the detriment of American companies.
Well, we have more to do. I believe that over the past year, we've put our bilateral relationship on a more stable footing. This is not meant ignoring our differences or avoiding tough conversations. It has meant understanding that we can only make progress if we directly and openly communicate with one another.
Meanwhile, the Chinese Premier Li Qiang said the US should refrain from turning economic and trade issues into political or security issues. A Xinhua report quoted Mr. Li as saying the US needs to work with China to adhere to basic standards for fair competition and open cooperation. He added that development of China's clean
मास्टर मल्टीफोम ले आया है साल की सबसे बड़ी ऑफर, रमजान असली रिप्लेसमेंट ऑफर। अपना कोई भी पुराना गैर मेयारी मैट्रेस लाएं और बिल्कुल नया मल्टीफोम मैट्रेस ले जाएं, वो भी एक जबरदस्त रियायती कीमत में। तो जल्दी आएं, यानी दूसरों का वादा मास्टर ने निभाया। ये ऑफर मास्टर सेलेस्ट पे भी है।
energy. Directly over the phone for the first time since November. And a further shake-up in China's ailing property sector. China Construction Bank has filed a liquidation lawsuit against the property firm Shimao Group over a financial obligation worth more than $200 million. In a Hong Kong exchange filing, Shimao said that it would oppose the lawsuit as it does not represent the collective interests of the company's offshore creditors and stakeholders. Instead, the company plans to press on with its proposed debt restructuring deal worth about $12 billion in offshore borrowings. Shanghai-based Shimao is among the many Chinese developers that have defaulted on offshore bonds since July 2022. The liquidation petition comes after similar action was taken by creditors against property giants China Evergrande and Country Garden. And the property sector there has been in crisis since 2021 after a regulatory crackdown on high leverage developers that triggered a liquidity crisis. And meantime, shares of Shimao Group in Hong Kong are down more than 10% in the face of that new liquidation risk. Broader China markets in the red as it resumes trade after a holiday. Indices have pared some of their earlier losses, investors digesting the central bank's latest cash boost to support the economy. The PBOC has allotted some $70 billion to provide more loans to its science and technology sectors. The relending program aims to support mid-sized tech firms through one-year loans that can be extended twice, and these loans will go through 21 banks. An analyst that we spoke to earlier said that winding up petitions against troubled companies like Shimao may not fully solve the problems faced by creditors.
this kind of creditors' actions and using the Hong Kong court to file this kind of winding up petitions is going to continue. But of course, it's very difficult because it's most of the asset of this Chinese property company in the mainland China. And so if you have winding up petitions in Hong Kong and even that is being granted, it's still quite difficult to only in certain city now you have some kind of pilot program to execute it. Otherwise, you cannot really execute those all in mainland China. So anyway, I think that will be more to come in China. The mainland Chinese authority will not bail out this kind of overextended and Chinese property company. They probably will help them in completing the project or take over the project within mainland China, but it's not going to bail out the offshore entities.
And other major markets in Asia trading higher, reflecting gains on Wall Street last week after a strong jobs data. Shares in Japan up more than 1%, extending its winning streak. The price action in South Korea and Singapore, though, more muted as investors await a slew of monetary policy decisions in the region this week, including ones from the Bank of Korea and the Monetary Authority of Singapore. Key inflation updates from the world's two largest economies take center stage this week alongside the start of the first quarter earnings season. Investors will be busy parsing the numbers to assess when interest rates may go down and if the so-called Goldilocks scenario can continue. A Goldilocks US economy would have everything just right, easing inflation and resilient growth, which would then make the Fed comfortable cutting rates more aggressively this year. But that narrative will be tested this week with the latest US consumer and producer price data, especially after hot inflation prints in the first 2 months of the year. And here in Asia, inflation data from China and India headline the economic releases this week. Deflationary pressures are seen to remain in China, underscoring the need for further policy boost. Inflation in India, meanwhile, is expected to tick slightly higher, but within the central bank range. Asia will also see a central bank blitz this week with 5 countries set to review monetary policy. The Philippines starts the ball rolling later today amid wide expectations. It will extend its pause, and central banks in New Zealand, Thailand, and South Korea will remain sidelined as well as policymakers weigh incoming inflation and also growth data. Meantime, the Monetary Authority of Singapore also expected to retain all settings as inflation fears linger. Singapore is also expected to report latest GDP figures on Friday. And America's big banks usher in a new earnings season on Friday too. Investors will be looking for strong profit growth to back rising valuations as Wall Street continues to rally. Analysts expect the S&P 500 companies to report a third straight quarter of earnings growth. And earlier, Kingsley Jones, who's CIO at Jevons Global, explained the forces that are driving the economy and jobs in the US and if this will impact the Fed's plan for a potential rate cut this year.
Yeah, I think that jobs data being so strong last week will probably see markets view this as a glass half full situation and probably rally from here. But there are warning signs out there. In particular, there were a large number of interest rate cuts that were expected at the beginning of this year, and now that's really being pared back. It's possible even that the Fed may not cut this year, simply because the US economy is doing pretty well. And I think, therefore, we need to dig into that, certainly as earnings come up. And I suspect that a large part of this is the fiscal stimulus from the Biden Inflation Reduction Act and the various factory construction that's been going on. So that is potentially leading to an economy that's probably doing better than perhaps would be a good thing at this time if you want to see the Fed lower rates. The Fed may actually sit now. I think it's useful to look at some of the market action, particularly in inflation-sensitive commodities like oil, gold, copper, and more recently uranium, which is for separate reasons having to do with reactor refueling. But they're all looking pretty strong. And last week, silver decided to join the party with a big move in the latter part of the week. So, look, I think that with bond yields falling as investors sell bonds, all eyes will be on that to see if it rises further and if that condition persists with investors seeking exposure to commodities.
Well, Kingsley, you're mentioning gold there. Well, the metal retaining its shine after hitting a record high and breaching $2,300 last week. The safe haven play driven by central banks bulking up on the commodity and traders preparing for a Fed policy shift. But the rally in oil prices has taken a pause, Brent and WTI declining more than 1.5%. And that as markets await data showing the outlook on supply and demand this week. Ease in geopolitical tensions in the Middle East have calmed fears of tightening supply after Israel withdrew more soldiers from southern Gaza and pledged to engage in new talks for a potential ceasefire. The U.S. Energy Information Administration and OPEC will release new supply and demand reports this week. Traders will be keen to assess whether the commodity can sustain its run of gains last week. And Boeing's safety woes continue. An engine cover fell off a Southwest Airlines Boeing 737-800 and then collided with a wing flap during takeoff from Denver International Airport. The U.S. Federal Aviation Administration said the flight was on its way to Houston, but eventually aborted the scheduled takeoff after the incident. Customers on the flight transferred to a different aircraft and then arriving at their destination 3 hours later. The FAA is investigating the incident. Boeing is under heightened regulatory scrutiny after a near-catastrophic incident in January. A door plug blew out of a nearly new 737 MAX 9 plane when the Alaska Airlines flight was cruising at 16,000 feet. And deliveries of new MAX aircraft are taking a hit as safety concerns mount. Major Boeing customers like Southwest and United say that the issues have affected their growth plans. And the long-awaited FAA certification of its 737 MAX 7 and MAX 10 models is also behind schedule. Amid the scrutiny, Boeing's shaken up its top brass. The CEO, Dave Calhoun, said he'll step down by the end of the year. And the turbulence has taken a toll on Boeing's stock, its shares tumbling more than 27% year to date. Ahead on Asia Now, the Japanese Prime Minister heads to Washington, D.C. to meet President Biden and hold a trilateral summit with the U.S. and the Philippines. Details up ahead.
6 months on, the impact of the war in Gaza. On this Sunday night, a grim anniversary 6 months after Hamas's attack on Israel. Hostages still in captivity.
It's truly heartbreaking, and I don't think that Israel will ever be the same.
While a humanitarian disaster unfolds in Gaza, will the latest round of truce talks finally broker peace? The intelligence may be artificial, but Ottawa says the money is real.
These investments are going to be a game changer.
Trudeau pledges billions for AI ahead of this month's federal budget. Countdown to the celestial show, the anticipation, the crowds, and what you need to know for tomorrow's solar eclipse. And he died 6 years ago, but saved 6 others.
It hasn't lost its momentum or its impact.
How a hockey player killed in the Humboldt bus crash spurred a national movement of organ donations.
Global National with RNASA. Reporting tonight, Carolyn Jarvis.
An intimate gathering in a dusty field in the southern part of Israel, not far from where 1,200 people were killed in the October 7th attacks by Hamas. Today, 6 months later, family members came together to remember them. Good evening, and thanks for joining us. Since that bloody day, Israel has exacted a brutal revenge, vowing to wipe out Hamas. The Israeli ground invasion has killed 25 times as many people in Gaza, including aid workers. The carnage has calls for a ceasefire growing louder by the day, and for Israel's prime minister to resign. Now, with another round of truce talks underway in Egypt, millions are hoping that relief is near. Redmond Shannon reports.
Khan Yunis, Gaza's second largest city, following Israel's reduction of its military presence in southern Gaza to 1 brigade, at least for now. I miss my town, my soul is here, says this man who is returning to the ruins of his home. Following 6 months of war, it's estimated more than half of the buildings in Gaza are damaged or destroyed. In central Gaza, aid arrives for the first time in 2 months. There is hope more will come. Israel has at least approved measures to do so after international outrage following its killing of 7 aid workers a week ago. Inside Gaza, there is little desire or opportunity to mark 6 months of war. But in Israel, families meet to mourn the hundreds of young people killed at the Nova Music Festival on October 7th. And large crowds gather again to demand their government do more to secure the release of hostages. Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu said again that the war will not stop until they are all released, a red line central to the peace talks that are resuming in Cairo. Hamas demands a full ceasefire.
And the way I see that, Hamas will try to prolong as much as possible the issue of the hostages. And I'm not very optimistic in that regard.
As the talks progress, the deeply unpopular Netanyahu maintains Israel will attack the crowded city of Rafah to fulfill his promise of wiping out Hamas. Israel says the weekend's withdrawal is in preparation for future missions like this.
And I think that Netanyahu is mostly guided by this issue of his legacy. How is he going to be recorded in the pages of history?
Even if a temporary pause is agreed, it will likely prove to be just that. What Israel and Hamas do have in common is that each wants to see the other destroyed. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
And later in the broadcast, we'll hear from the daughter of one of the Israeli hostages, a Canadian woman whose body has yet to be repatriated from Gaza. To the deepening crisis in Haiti, where evacuation flights for Canadians stranded there were set to end today, but Ottawa now says any other Canadian seeking an exit will have another chance.
We're going to continue to make sure we're there to support people as best as possible and as necessary as possible.
On social media, Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly says there was an influx of last-minute requests for help. She says there will now be an additional flight later this week. On Friday, Global Affairs Canada said they had helped more than 250 Canadians, permanent residents, and their family members leave Haiti as escalating gang violence grips the country. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was in Montreal today, continuing what has been a week of pre-budget announcements. He promised to spend billions of dollars on artificial intelligence research, skills training, and regulation. But as our chief political correspondent David Aiken reports, all that spending has the leader of the official opposition calling for restraint.
So today, I am announcing that our upcoming budget...
Justin Trudeau's been doing this almost every day for the last week, making multi-billion-dollar announcements about what will be in his government's April the 16th budget. On Sunday, it was $2.4 billion over 5 years to develop artificial intelligence tools, train workers in the use of AI, and to regulate the use of these tools.
These investments are going to be a game changer.
On hand for the announcement, researcher Yoshua Bengio. Some say he is one of the world's godfathers of AI, and he praised the decision to fund ways to make sure AI is used safely.
How do we build future AI systems that may be even surpassing human intelligence, that are also safe, that will not turn against humans? We don't know how to do that. It's urgent to invest in this.
The Prime Minister's week-long tour has involved billions in spending commitments for housing, for childcare, a new national school lunch program. But all that spending is too much for the Conservative opposition.
He's out making multi-billion-dollar announcements of inflationary spending that will drive up the cost of your living again. It's like he's spraying billions of dollars out of a fire hose, but it's more like spraying gasoline on the fire.
The Conservatives are demanding the government move towards a balanced budget by finding spending cuts to match any increases in spending on new programs.
Cap spending with a dollar-for-dollar law to bring down inflation and interest rates.
Trudeau says that's the wrong approach.
Pierre Poilievre has continued to promote austerity and cuts as the path forward for Canada and for Canadians. He is wrong.
Expect more spending commitments on Monday, this time on the military. The government will unveil its long-awaited defense policy update. That's the blueprint for future defense strategy and future defense spending. Carolyn.
David Aiken in Ottawa, thank you. The president of Rwanda delivered a powerful message today on the 30th anniversary of the Rwandan genocide.
Rwanda was completely humbled by the magnitude of our loss, and the lessons we learned are engraved in blood.
Among those attending the day's events, former U.S. President Bill Clinton, who has called the genocide a failure of his administration. The killing began in 1994 after a plane crash claimed the lives of the presidents of Rwanda and Burundi. In the months that followed, an estimated 800,000 minority Tutsi and Hutu moderates were slaughtered by Hutu extremists, while the outside world failed to intervene. Well, the countdown is on to a once-in-a-generation celestial event. Roughly 24 hours from now, millions of eyes across North America will be on the sky for the solar eclipse. People in southern Ontario, Quebec, and much of Atlantic Canada are in the path of totality. One of the best and busiest places to watch will be Niagara Falls. And that's where Global's Karen Lieberman is tonight. Karen.
There is a sense of excitement in the air with the clock ticking down to that moment when the moon glides before the sun and darkness descends. Here in Niagara Falls, up to 1 million people are expected.
The crowds are already gathering ahead of Monday's rare celestial event.
It's going to be pretty exciting, yeah.
We're here with 1 million of our new best friends. We saw the eclipse in 2017 in North Carolina, and so we knew we had to travel out of our way to come this time. We're so excited. It's my first time here. That's why people are flocking to the falls. Famous for its natural wonders, it's been named by National Geographic as one of the top places in the world to observe the total solar eclipse.
You came for the eclipse?
Came for the eclipse, yep. Drove about 6 hours to get up here.
It's first in a lifetime, certainly for me. For you, we the same. So we've come with just open eyes and ears just to take it all in.
This will be a first also for astronaut Jeremy Hansen, who's preparing to become the first Canadian to venture to the moon.
See some neat lighting effects. We'll see colors change. We're going to see animals and nature react as if it's twilight and turning into darkness. And we're going to be able to observe the sun in a way that we can't normally do safely. It's talking about planetary bodies aligning perfectly. It's just a rare opportunity.
One that this eclipse-watching couple has been planning for 4 years.
When it's coming, it's going to Niagara. We should do this. And then we had 2 kids. We're like, that's not going to happen. But she decided to make it happen.
100% totality darkness, so it's really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see that.
The big wild card is the weather. With clouds in the forecast, the view could be obscured. Let's wait and see, Carolyn.
Karen Lieberman in Niagara Falls. Thanks, Karen. Well, as she just mentioned, there's so much riding on the weather for an event like this. If clouds do roll through, anticipation can turn to frustration. To help guide eclipse chasers, we're joined by Global's chief meteorologist, Anthony Farnell. Anthony.
Carolyn, there has never been so much riding on a cloud forecast, one of the harder things to predict in advance. We do use satellites. We also use computer modeling. This is where the clouds are now, and this is the system that, at least for much of Ontario, will be playing a role in tomorrow's viewing. And for some, yes, it'll likely lead to frustration. This is what we're all waiting for as the moon comes between the sun and Earth, and then that moment of totality, which in some cases could be more than 3.5 minutes, it will affect the weather. The temperature will drop. Nature will almost go silent, and that's what we're all waiting for in this path. Will it be clear? Well, here's the clouds for much of southern Ontario. Niagara has a shot at clearing out at the last moment. Looking good for southwestern Ontario. Also, clear skies through extreme eastern Ontario. Quebec, New Brunswick could have some of the best viewing of the entire region. Newfoundland also, partly cloudy conditions. Now, that is in the path of totality, but there's, of course, others that are going to be watching across the country. So what can you expect? Well, as we go through northern Ontario into Manitoba, likely overcast. And if it's cloudy and you're not in that path of totality, you're not going to see a whole lot. You may notice a bit of a dimming effect right around that moment. Meanwhile, for parts of Saskatchewan and Manitoba, clear skies expected, but only 20 to 40% of the sun will be covered by the moon. Happy viewing tomorrow.
Thanks for that, Anthony. So the weather is one thing, geography is another. Coming up, who's in and who's out for prime viewing of tomorrow's show in the sky.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mansour Shuman, and together with your support, we can ensure that the people on the ground in Gaza remain strong and steadfast in order to ensure that aid comes into Gaza in the amount that is needed. I worked with the Amal charity while I was on the ground in Gaza, and today they continue to provide iftars to those that are most in need, the displaced refugees across Gaza Strip. They are relying on your support to ensure that they are able to feed the people on the ground. Please click on the link below to ensure that your funds help the people in Gaza right now.
مطر يغيث من العنا كالفرج من رب السماء يحيي الحياة إذا
Tomorrow's eclipse comes down to a science where seconds and geography really count. Who's in the path of totality and who's out? And what time exactly should you be reaching for those solar glasses? Eric Sorensen breaks it all down for us.
It is a celestial wonder, and millions of Earthlings will have a chance to watch. Eclipse t-shirts are selling in Ohio, Solar Soda in Texas, and in this Tennessee factory, 80 million safety glasses are being turned out.
I mean, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, right?
Long ago, a solar eclipse was frightening to humans, but became one of the earliest understood scientific phenomena that to this day remains awe-inspiring.
There is that kind of human experience of darkness at noon, which is unexpected, unnatural, but here you have something kind of singular that mathematically and geometrically people were able to predict thousands of years ago.
Monday's eclipse will begin when the moon moves directly in line between the sun and Earth, casting a narrow shadow over the Pacific Ocean.
but seeing it will depend on the weather, though it can all change locally when the moon's shadow causes temperatures to drop. Most of North America will experience a partial eclipse, but the real show, totality, going from daylight to almost darkness, begins at Mazatlan, Mexico, just after 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 o'clock Eastern. 30 minutes later, the shadow, up to 180 kilometers across, will pass over Dallas. In another half hour, totality begins over Buffalo and Niagara Falls at 3:18 Eastern. This is where many Canadians will gather. Hamilton is just inside totality, Toronto not quite, which makes a difference. Kingston is in, Ottawa is out. Montreal is in totality, Quebec City is not. And then a glorious sweep across New Brunswick, and then over western Prince Edward Island, and finally across Newfoundland and Labrador from the Codroy Valley to Bonavista at 5:13 p.m. Newfoundland time. The eclipse exiting North America less than 2 hours after starting on the Pacific coast of Mexico. In the center of the moon's path, totality could last 4 minutes. Closer to the edge, about a minute or two. But even at 99% of totality, the sun can damage the eyes permanently.
The sun, even at 1% brightness, is very bright.
This astrophysicist says in those minutes where there's totality, it's safe to look up.
After that darkness has fallen and the moon is fully blocking the sun, then you can look directly at the eclipse. But at no other point can you, and if you're outside of the path of totality, you can never look at the sun safely.
So if you're planning to take a look, be safe. Carolyn?
All right, thanks, Eric. Eric Sorensen in Toronto. Climate activist Greta Thunberg has been arrested twice in the Netherlands. Thunberg was detained along with several other protesters who tried to block a major highway into The Hague. Hours later, she was released by police and was rearrested when she rejoined the protest against fossil fuel subsidies. Thunberg, who is now 21 years old, explained her actions, saying, quote, "We are in a planetary emergency." Demands for repatriation still ahead. A family torn apart by the Hamas attacks fights to ensure their loved ones are not forgotten. As we reported earlier, today marks the 6-month anniversary of the Hamas attacks. There are roughly 130 hostages still being held in Gaza. Some have been killed, including Canadian Judith Weinstein-Hagge. Her husband was also killed on October 7th. Now their daughter in Toronto is calling for her remains to be repatriated. Crystal Gomansing reports, and a warning, some of the images in this story may be difficult to watch.
Playful artists in love. Judith Weinstein-Hagge practiced mindfulness and wrote haikus. Jazz was Gad Hagge's creative outlet.
He could play almost every instrument you could give him. He played since he was 3 years old. My mom was a poet, and all she wanted is to create happiness. And I really believe it's because she grew up in Canada. It's so hard to talk about her in past.
Iris Weinstein-Hagge aches knowing her parents' bodies are somewhere in Gaza.
We don't have a corpse. We don't have anything.
What the family does have are images of their parents on their final morning walk, October 7th, a text chain asking if they're okay, and audio of a desperate call for help. Judith pleads to be rescued. She says her husband has been shot in the head and detailed her own wounds as well. On kibbutz near Oz and others near the Gaza Strip, a massacre unfolded, ending the lives of more than 1,000 people. Hamas and other militants executed individuals, torched homes, and took more than 250 people hostage.
It's just a constant hole in the heart that keeps getting bigger and bigger.
More than 100 captives are still being held. Their conditions aren't known, but families protest, meet with dignitaries, and push to bring them all home.
I was just in the Prime Minister's office 2 weeks ago, and with Minister Jolie. It doesn't seem like Canada's aware of the power it has.
Multinational negotiations resulted in a pause in fighting in November that saw some hostages exchanged, but a second deal has not materialized. The Israeli government's plan to eliminate Hamas through military action in Gaza hasn't let up.
We need to get the hostages out so the war can end.
Peace is what Weinstein-Hagge seeks, not revenge. She says with every passing day, innocent people on both sides suffer. Crystal Gomansing, Global News, London.
Life-saving legacy. Next, how Canadians are honoring the selfless act of a hockey player killed in the Humboldt bus crash. It was 6 years ago this weekend. The Humboldt bus crash claimed the lives of 16 people and injured 13 others. Among those killed, Logan Boulet, a defenseman on the junior hockey team. The young man's organs were donated. As Gates Guarin reports, that generous act inspired tens of thousands of Canadians to sign up as donors as well.
Out of immense tragedy came a conversation about saving lives. The Logan Boulet Effect and Green Shirt Day, ensuring his memory and the memory of those who donate their organs will live on.
I think it makes a big difference that to know that the story is still continuing, that it's not, it hasn't lost its momentum or its impact or its inspiration.
Logan was one of 29 people involved in the Humboldt Broncos bus crash. The difficult decision to donate his organs saved the lives of 6 others.
It's a proud moment to know that Logan's legacy, Logan's story, has continued on for 6 years, and that it's growing all the time.
His parents, Toby and Bernadine, say continuing to tell Logan's story has helped with the grieving process, and believe they have seen a change in the way people now talk about organ donation.
It's a lot easier to do than it was 6 years ago.
Across Canada, more than 4,000 people are waiting for organ transplants, yet only 1/3 of Canadians have registered as donors. Health professionals hope to see the number of donors continue to climb.
We want people to have that most important of conversations, that conversation with their loved ones, with their family and friends, to let everybody know what their wishes are with regards to organ donation and transplantation.
These sentiments echoed by Kyla Thompson, the mother of 10-year-old Bella, who received a bowel transplant last August.
And that's when I really learned how important it is to not only encourage people to register as an organ donor, but to just even keep the discussion going.
With Bella's renewed spirit and energy, her mother is thankful, believing healing can come from those difficult conversations.
The more people talk about it, the more people understand it, then more kids like Bella have a chance at surviving.
So as we continue to commemorate a moment of loss every April, we are reminded that countless others, like Bella, are able to live on through the selfless act of donating. Gates Gorin, Global News, Saskatoon.
And that is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Carolyn Jarvis. Tonight's Your Canada is the Northern Gulf Islands in BC. Thanks for watching. Donna will be back with you tomorrow.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.